Hi, today I wanted to share some authors and book recommendations specifically for Women in Translation Month, which is in August every year. I think it's wonderful to have a specific time of year where people are focused on this particular subsection of authors, women who are writing in languages other than English. It's great to highlight these authors. Though, of course, the goal, and I think for me, I take it super seriously to read intentionally, diversely throughout the year. And that includes, for me, reading authors from different backgrounds, authors who are writing in different languages, people who have perspectives and experiences that are not like my own. And I wanted to share today some authors that I've enjoyed their work in the past. These are great recommendations if you're looking for something to pick up for Women in Translation Month, and also to share with these authors some other books that I would like to read from them in the future. This list that I made does reflect my reading taste of liking a variety between nonfiction and fiction, so there'll be some fiction on this list, there'll be some nonfiction. Not all the fiction is literary. I have some speculative fiction recommendations as well, so I think there'll be a little something for everyone here. Svetlana Alexievich is a Belarusian author. She is a journalist whose work has mostly focused on chronicling firsthand accounts of people's experience with war. The book that I've read from her, War's Unwomanly Face, and this is a collection of accounts by Soviet women and their experience with World War II. Some of these were women who were serving in the war as a nurse or someone who was engaged in the combat. Others are perspectives of the women who were back at home, caring for the house and children, while many and much of the men were away fighting on the front lines. And she takes this very particular approach with her writing where you're just kind of seeing these little vignettes of people's lives. Her writing feels super personal, and there's a whole variety of experiences encompassed within her work. I think this book is key reading for understanding World War II, specifically from this perspective of a Soviet woman. What I'm most interested in reading next from her is her account of the Soviet-Afghan War. And again, this book follows personal firsthand experiences of people she's interviewed that encompass a variety of experiences had. Cho Nam-ju is a South Korean author who primarily writes fiction, and she's actually only written a few things that have been translated to English yet, and she's still writing. Her book that I've read and gained a lot of popularity, hence why I heard about it and wanted to read it as well, was Kim Jiyoung, born 1982. And this is a fiction book where the author has taken some firsthand experiences from her own life and woven them into this fictional story, which follows a South Korean woman as she grows up in life, and she is dealing and facing this constant sexism and misogyny in her everyday life. And this book I thought was really well written, in that it was extremely relatable. I think if you're a woman, you are bound to find something in here that is relatable and unfortunately infuriating way that this is the reality of the world that we're living in. It was interesting to see how the gender dynamics and norms were playing out in this novel set in South Korea and relating that to experiences that I've had in the US as an American woman. Yōko Ogawa is another quite famous author. She is Japanese, and quite a few of her books have been translated into English. Her most famous and well-known book is the one that I've read, which is The Memory Police. And this is speculative fiction. It's a dystopian world where people are losing their memory of objects, essentially, or things. All of a sudden, things are disappearing from the world that they're living in, and also, most people cannot recall what those things were, that they even existed in the first place, and what their uses were, what the value were in these things. This is a very interesting book dealing with memory and also the fear of losing memory. This book also deals with the loss that one feels when there is a lack of memory that just no longer exists, relating to, you know, an event, a thing, it could be a person. So I found this book really fascinating. I would also like to read The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yōko Ogawa, which is another well-known book of this author. This is a different genre. It's literary fiction, though it deals with similar themes. You're following a housekeeper and a professor, and the professor has short-term memory loss. The housekeeper and the professor have this working relationship, but it's fascinating as the memory of, you know, past conversation, past events is constantly lost and then re-picked up anew because of this condition that the professor has. So I think it will be really fascinating to compare how this theme of memory and loss plays out in both, you know, a literary fiction style book compared to like a speculative fiction book by the same author. I really am drawn to authors who like to carry themes across multiple of their works. I just think it adds so much to learning about the author, and you can engage in their works in just a different way, which is always fun. Assia Djebar. This author is Algerian and she writes in French. The book that I've read from her is Women of Algiers in Their Apartments, and this is a short story collection that follows women and their everyday lives in both post-colonial and colonial French rule in Algeria. Political backdrop is very strong within these short stories. You have colonialism, you also have these very strict gender norms that are being adhered to and, you know, women are pushing against in her stories. And she's a feminist author and a thinker, and I really think her work should be more well read. At first, I found it a bit dense to get into, and I wasn't really in the groove of reading her writing style. I needed to know a bit more about politics and history to fully orient myself within these stories. But once I did a little bit of, you know, just research and learning about Algeria and French colonial rule there, it really brought her stories to life for me, and I think they're amazing and more people should be reading them. Nawal el-Saadawi is an Egyptian author and activist who writes across genres. She has written a lot of nonfiction and fiction as well. I had been wanting to read this author for a really long time but didn't have any access to her books until I realized the library had one of her books, and it was called Love in the Kingdom of Oil. So I started here, which I'm gonna say right now, I do not recommend starting here with this author. I would definitely start with one of her well-known books, maybe Women at Point Zero or The Hidden Face of Eve to start with, because Love in the Kingdom of Oil was super disorienting. It is about a woman who walks off from her family, leaves her husband behind, and she just kind of disappears out into this open desert. It went way over my head. I didn't get it. I then read Woman at Point Zero, which, as I'm going to recommend, is a much better starting place with her work. This is a fiction book that follows a sex worker who is in prison because she has killed a pimp. And she is reflecting on her life leading up to this moment. She is writing from prison and talking about being a woman and just her plight now that this has occurred and the things that have led up to this event happening. I do now own both books that make up Saadawi's autobiography, so I think I'll be reading their next. The first book of her autobiography is called A Daughter of Isis, and the second one is Walk Through Fire. The two together make up her autobiography. She's a person I would love to read more about. She was super outspoken, an activist, and faced a lot of repercussions for that, and continue to be a voice for women in this region during this time period. Annie Ernaux is a very well-known French author whose works are known for being very short and they are autobiographical. She takes these very small sections of her life and puts them to paper. She's very reflective in her writing and super honest. I have now read 3 books by Annie Ernaux and certainly plan to read a lot more. She's very prolific in her work, so there's a lot to get to, but again, they're all very short, very slim books. So I started with A Woman's Story, which is a great place to start. This is Annie Ernaux's account of her mother's history And she begins to write this book after her mother has passed away from Alzheimer's. And it's her goal to just put to words her mother's life, her mother's story, and how that interweaves with her own, and especially how that relationship began to change as, a parent no longer becomes the caregiver. And oftentimes later in life, the parent is the one who needs to be taken care of by the child. This was a fantastic place to start with her. I next read The Possession, which deals with Annie Ernaux's jealousy. This is an extreme period of Ernaux's life where she is experiencing jealousy to like the nth degree. She's so fixated on the loss of a lover, and she becomes obsessed with his new partner. So this is very different than A Woman's Story and super personal. Definitely a bit uncomfortable at times, but that's what makes Annie Ernaux's work so good. It's so real. And then I also read The Young Man, which deals with Annie Ernaux's affair with a younger man that she was seeing. This one I didn't care for as much, but was still valuable, and I think overall the goal with Annie Ernaux for me is to read all of her work, because they're all these little snippets of her life. Putting them all together is just like putting a puzzle together. I think that what she's doing with her writing is super beautiful and ambitious in putting her life's story to words. I think the next places I would turn with her is A Man's Place, which, similar to A Woman's Story, follows her dad's personal history. Also, A Girl's Story sounds quite good as well, and this is hyper-focused on her late teen years. Which is just such a vulnerable, like tender time, I think, especially for young girls. I know in this book she talks about losing her virginity and an early relationship and just the pains that come with that experience, which is something that I think I'll find a lot of relatability in, and I think many would as well. Samantha Schweblin is an Argentinian author who primarily writes speculative fiction, a little bit of horror. Her books are dystopian in nature, and really fascinating author. She hasn't written a ton yet. She's quite young. She has written just 2 novels thus far that have been translated to English, and then some short story collections as well. I have read both of her novels. I first read Little Eyes, which I absolutely loved, but I didn't realize that I loved it so much until after the fact. This is a book that I honestly find myself thinking about regularly, and it's been over a year since I've read this book, but just the concept itself is so relevant to where we are in current day with technology, and also this book was freaking creepy. So you're following these little kentukis, which are these like stuffed animal dolls that can be controlled by other humans. Their eyes are cameras, and you are dealing with multiple storylines where people are finding companionship in these little creatures. They are definitely being exploited for their voyeurism. It's really a brutal book in its exploration of the dangers of technology, which is something that I think we all are fearing and also is totally inevitable. I then read Fever Dream, which I also really liked, and I found the adaptation very good. I'd recommend that as well, but only watch it after reading the book. It really brings to life so much of this kind of eerie and surreal feeling that the book gives you. The book, in Fever Dream, you are following a woman who is in a hospital. She is dying, and she is visited by a young boy, and we don't exactly know who he is or why he's there, or, even is he actually fully present. We are uncertain of that, and this isn't a book where you have answers. This is a book where you are meant to draw your own conclusions, and there is certainly a lot more than appears on the surface of this novel. It's very short, and I definitely recommend, again, watching the adaptation and reading a lot of explanations and the backstory behind what inspired this book post-reading it. Schweblin is coming out with a short story collection soon that is being translated to English. and I actually have an e-arc of this, so I will get to it before it is released and let you know what I think. I'm excited to see what her short stories hold, given I've only read her novels thus far. Adania Shibli is a Palestinian author who has written short fiction and also nonfiction as well. I've read Minor Detail, which is a novella that follows dual timelines. It is fictional, but has a lot of history woven within it. It follows a young woman who, shortly after the Nakba, was then subjected to violence by Israeli soldiers in extreme forms. This book is super graphic and very heavy. And the second timeline is a woman in present day who is now researching this event. She is on a mission to uncover more of this woman's story and the event that unfolded so many years before. Åsne seierstad is another author who's a journalist. She is a war reporter, and she has written both fiction and nonfiction, though I'm definitely more interested in her nonfiction writing. I have read One of Us, the story of Anders Breivik and the massacre in Norway. This is a nonfiction book that talks about the details and events leading up to Norway's deadliest terrorist attack, which killed 77 people. Seierstad takes this very journalistic approach in that she's highly detailed, very well researched in this event and the people who are involved. She goes very in depth of the killer's life and radicalization, which is highly disturbing, and I think is also important to acknowledge exactly what the heck these people are thinking when they go to do something so absolutely awful. She also is incredibly detailed in her accounts of the victims' lives as well. Not just, something said in passing about who this person was, but detailed accounts of their history. Many of these people were children and young. She memorializes these people so beautifully. This book is very difficult to read in that it's so scary, just this event. And it's so tragic that it occurred, and just so disturbing what thoughts were in this person's mind. This author has a new book coming out called The Afghans, which is about 3 different Afghani people and their lives under Taliban rule. It's very recent, her reporting on these people's lives, so it'll be especially enlightening to see what life is like for these people now that the Taliban have again assumed total rule of Afghanistan. To finish this off, I have to talk about Elena Ferrante, my favorite author and someone whose work I absolutely adore. She is an Italian author whose books are literary fiction, though she has written nonfiction as well. Most of her books deal with Italian women, young girls, family dynamics, relationships. To start with her, I would read The Days of Abandonment. It's very short. It's a standalone of hers. I do think you should read it prior to reading The Neapolitan Quartet, as it will give you a good idea if you gel with her writing and themes. It follows a mother who is having relationship issues with her husband, and she has children to care for, and things are just getting too much for her. It's overwhelming. It is a bit feverish in its nature, a bit hallucinatory, which is, I think, a bit different than some of Ferrante's other work, but the themes that are discussed within this novel are so much so what is at Ferrante's core. This struggle with womanhood, being a mother, and relationships. That is it for this video. Let me know if you've read any of these authors, if you're interested in any of their work, and what you will be reading in Women in Translation Month.